Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are Team Starbucks, and we're doing our strategic analysis. I am Darren Rodriguez, and we're joined here with Jack, Sebastian, Natalie, Katrina, myself, and Ania. First, a little bit about our agenda and what we're going to go over today. We're going to go through our part one with our industry, external, and internal analysis just to understand a little bit about our problem. Then we're going to defining some key issues, the stakeholders, and the root causes. And finally, we're going to go into solving this, with our strategic options, our implementation plan, and our risk and countermeasures. Going over our executive summaries, our key issue is the high threat of substitutes and significant buyer power in the market. Some real challenges are the difficulties in staying ahead of these competitors, and also due to this changing consumer base. And finally, our main recommendation is going to address common pain points of non-Starbucks consumers.
Yeah, so we use Porter's 5 Forces to provide a framework that highlights the attractiveness of the coffee industry, specifically in view of which forces have the greatest impact on Starbucks. So, the coffee industry has an intense competitive rivalry. Competitors include not only other coffee shops, but also convenience stores, gas stations, fast food restaurants, and at-home coffee and espresso machines. Starbucks' key competitors are Dunkin' Donuts and JAB brands, which include shops like Panera and Pete's. These 3 brands make up almost 80% of US coffee shops, with Starbucks in the lead for market share. So in terms of threat of new entry, for small local coffee shops, there are low to moderate barriers to entry because there's not a massive upfront investment. Whereas if a coffee shop intends to compete against big players in the industry, there are higher barriers to entry due to significant infrastructure and investments that are needed for a similar level of brand recognition. Without years of establishing intricate coffee infrastructure, it'd be nearly impossible to compete with larger chains on price or customer loyalty. So in the coffee industry, there is a moderate threat of substitute products. Potential substitutes include soda, sports drinks, juices, and other caffeinated beverages or products. Home coffee and espresso machines are also possible substitutes. In addition, there is significant buyer power due to very low switching costs for customers to change shops. If a price is too high at one shop, a customer can easily find another nearby. While many coffee drinkers tend to frequent one coffee shop, there's often very little holding them there besides convenience. And lastly, the supplier power force is very weak for Starbucks suppliers since the company sources its beans from hundreds of small farms around the world. This protects against instability or shortages in the supply chain, while simultaneously allowing Starbucks to not have to rely on any one farm for beans. And now I'll pass it back to Darren.
Thank you so much. For our external analysis, we're going to do the pestle diagram. First, we're going to go into politics. Politics plays a large role in government regulations and impact of construction and new developments, especially regarding new developments of drive-through locations, which is very popular with Starbucks, and hindering these in growing areas. Next, we're going to talk about high economic growth of developing countries and the rising domestic unemployment, and the higher cost of this foreign labor and having Starbucks break into these new environments. And thirdly, we're going to go into social-cultural. This also talks about the consumer shift from baby boomers to Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z, and how Starbucks is going to keep up with these. Going into technological, the necessity of integrating technology with the user experience and leading these expectations of these amenities. These things are like the touch with your phone, being able to pay through the tap, and things like Wi-Fi and any other new technology advantages that arise. We're also going to go into environmental concerns about the impact and push for greener initiatives, especially with the supplier power that we're talking about and where they source their beans from. And lastly, talk about legal aspects, about health regulations and the influence of this on the consumer perception of the products. And now I hand it over to Anuya.
So for the internal analysis, since its founding in 1971, Starbucks has been motivated by the ideals of a quality product. As such, they have enforced several strategies to maintain this echelon of quality throughout the years, keeping it consistent among the entire company. The first of these is the brand equity benefits, which entails merchandising products and licensing its brand logo to increase revenues. This brand equity was established through Starbucks' wide product base. Its large selection of products can fit taste for a huge range of demographics. This ensures that their fans stay loyal to their brand and venture into purchasing their licensed products. Quality is also emphasized through their efforts in social responsibility. Special programs developed by Starbucks, such as their recycling initiative, as well as their continued support of the ethical sourcing of their products, has elevated the brand to become the paradigm of a socially responsible company. Another company-wide internal strength is a value of benefits they provide for their employees. Starbucks' human capital is regarded highly, and the company puts in work to ensure they are happy by providing them with benefits that like stock options, a healthy company culture, and tuition assistance. These efforts have paid up, and Starbucks has recently been featured at one of the top 100 places to work, according to Forbes magazine. Now we'll move on to the SWOT analysis. In terms of strengths, Starbucks has been extremely successful in using its mobile platform to increase convenience for customers. As of October 2020, Starbucks announced that nearly a quarter of sales were placed from a phone order. In comparison to its competitors, the company has a leading mobile platform in terms of rewards, customer loyalty, and data. Starbucks also distinguishes itself from its competitors through its emphasis on working on small local businesses. This is a huge advantage because by having a variety of smaller suppliers, supply or bargaining power is very low. In terms of weaknesses, the threat of substitutes for Starbucks products is high due to numerous competitors with comparable products and low switching costs for consumers. This risk is increased because Starbucks tend to be priced higher than many of its competitors. In addition, the Starbucks real estate model is somewhat outdated. Many consumers would rather wait in their car in a drive-thru than to be packed in a small retail location. Starbucks data shows that their site with drive-thrus are far more profitable and lucrative. And that moving on to opportunities due to COVID-19, e-commerce is more popular than ever. While Starbucks previously relied on samples in roasteries and in-store displays to sell its coffee beans and grounds, it should now pivot to online sales. The company has the opportunity to move away from the impulse buy strategy and checkout lines and move towards more targeted online marketing. In terms of threats, Starbucks' model for many of its locations, especially reserved roasteries, is to create an environment where customers like to sit and stay. This model is threatened by the onset of COVID-19 and has transitioned much of the business to to-go orders. If Starbucks were to update its real estate model to include more drive-through locations, they would likely be faced with the lack of available drive-through locations. Many cities and states around the country are attempting to fight traffic and pollution caused by drive-through locations. Now, I'm going to hand it off to Sebastian to talk about strategic issues.
Thank you, Anuya. In order to solve the challenges that Starbucks is currently facing and make the best out of these opportunities, Starbucks has to analyze, one, the common practices of its competitors, two, highlight their presence as a high-quality product chain, and three, they must change the layout and dynamics of their stores, given that 80% of the transactions at nearly 15,000 US stores were considered on-the-go purchases. So who are stakeholders here? The first challenge, of course, is customers seeking a lower price. Starbucks can't risk having Dunkin' Donuts have lower prices and having these customers be prone to switching to Dunkin' Donuts as a competitor, mainly because of its low prices. You know, Starbucks needs to consider implementing an affordable menu so that these customers will switch to the other options. Secondly, customers who are seeking a higher quality coffee, it's also another issue that's been presented to Starbucks, essentially because Starbucks doesn't really have high quality coffee for those coffee snob connoisseurs in the market. You know, many of these connoisseurs prefer to go to a local coffee shop instead of going to Starbucks because of the lack of quality in Starbucks. So another option, another opportunity for Starbucks to implement their business would be to add a higher quality coffee bean, because these people essentially are trying to know where the bean was sourced and even how it was roasted. And lastly, Starbucks is really known as a strong credit tenant for landlords, and it's really attractive. It's always been one of the first options for all landlords. And essentially, they need to update their business model to include far more drive-through locations since there's a high demand for them. And essentially, according to a study done by Allegra, 63% of those who participated said they would grab their coffee inside of their car rather than being inside of the store. So this is also another opportunity for Starbucks to implement into their business. Now we move on to Natalie so she can discuss the root causes.
Thank you. So from all of the things that we analyzed and found there were key issues of, we identified the root causes, and these include lower spending power due to economic recessions, especially the one we're going through right now due to COVID-19. People are finding that they have less spending power and don't want to spend it on Starbucks. Next, there have been weak marketing efforts to promote the higher quality products that Starbucks does have. So if we did introduce higher quality products, they wouldn't be marketed given the past marketing efforts. And lastly, there are external factors that are preventing appropriate expansion of drive-throughs. As we mentioned, there are political and legal factors, so those are some things that need to be addressed. Now I'll pass it on to Jack to solve this issue.
All right, thank you, Natalie. So first thing, we would recommend that Starbucks would price point. I myself do not like most other customers, or quite a few customers, do not like how expensive their coffee is. So, I tend to brew my own coffee, which is a substitute, but others might opt to go to places like McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts. So the one thing we do recommend that Starbucks look to do is adding a more affordable option to each product line. Like Sebastian had alluded to, quality is an issue among your typical coffee snob connoisseur per se. They will probably opt to go to some of the smaller coffee shops who put a lot more effort, into brewing practices as well as sourcing higher quality beans. So definitely they should look to improve the quality to attract that kind of consumer. And then, of course, per Natalie and what she said, drive-through locations are very popular. The vast majority of consumers will look to, essentially buy their coffee via a drive-through, and all these strategic options that we discuss are to address their ultimate underlying issue with customer acquisition. Starbucks is focused immensely on customer retention. So with these options, it will hopefully, basically help in acquiring those customers who do not currently consume Starbucks, but also make the whole process of buying from Starbucks significantly more appealing. Implementation plan. So the first thing, you definitely want to add cheaper alternatives to each product line. This will drive revenue and in turn allow Starbucks to invest in R&D as far as improving the quality of their coffee as well as updating their real estate model. And then as far as quality goes, they really need to solidify their brand as high quality, upper tier. So hosting coffee tasting events in upper middle class neighborhoods specifically because they have the incomes for these higher quality coffees. And that will essentially create exposure, as a higher quality coffee brand. And this is going to be done in peak business hours as well. And then for adding drive-throughs, first step is probably hiring a well-known, very established leasing agent, thoroughly researching profitable drive-through leases with that agent, and then submitting LOIs on new properties and making tenant improvements. So, and diversifying price, action two, again, you want to maintain the brand guidelines, but you also want to offer items at a lower cost to drive those customers who are currently excluded from consuming Starbucks due to the price point. And second step for improving quality, train employees on best brewing practices. Everything in the brewing process, it even comes down to how hot the water is in brewing the coffee. It really does affect the taste. It really affects the flavor and the notes that come out of the coffee. And if you don't brew it correctly, these coffee connoisseurs and snobs per se are going to take note of that and continue purchasing their coffee from the small mom and pop shops that really do a better job of it. And as far as risks and countermeasures go, obviously, we can't just go ahead and add cheaper options to the menu. This will require a pretty in-depth analysis of competitor pricing, where they get their products from, among other things as well. We don't want to just jump into this with cheaper options. Here's a coffee, here's a cheaper option. And premium quality coffee, it might not be as profitable as one may think. So in order to effectively solve against this potential risk, extensive testing is definitely required in each market, sending out surveys, conducting coffee tasting events, among other things. And again, government regulations of drive-throughs, a huge issue. In states like California, they're limiting the number of drive-throughs that are really available. So it's definitely competitive. But clean air initiatives, obviously, working with a good leasing agent are good countermeasures. Next slide, please. And I'll pass it off to Darren.
Thank you so much. Again, just some of our key findings. To address the key issue of the high threat of substitution and significant buyer power that stems from the root challenge of a changing consumer environment, the main recommendation we have for Starbucks is to address the common pain points of non-Starbucks consumers to increase their market share through the acquisition of new customers. And that really wraps it up for us. And thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We look forward to hearing from all of you.